Hi, this is Mark Arnold with Fun Ideas Podcast, and today we have a couple special guests brought to us courtesy of Charles F. Rosenay. He brings us great guests involved with music. And today we have two creators of the Beatles Story Museum, and they've written a book about it called The Birth of the Beatles Story, and their names are Mike and Bernadette Byrne. How are you today? I was going to say, how are you, sir? But it's like, it's a couple.
We're fine. Thank you very much. Yeah,
We're
so
good.
far so good. Yeah.
So, I got a copy of the book from Allison, and it was at first I was just going to skim it because I'm a huge Beatles fan. I figured I know everything about the Beatles, and then I got really immersed with the book, and I actually read all the way through it. So that lucky you. So I know what I'm talking about.
We are impressed.
So I guess I just have questions based on what I read. So, I mean, if you want all the nitty gritty details of what's in the book, you'll have to buy this book when it's out in May. Is it out now, or is it coming out?
It's out in this
we launched it last Sunday, a week today ago, okay. And we actually launched it down at the Beatles Story exhibition.
Very good. Okay. So the first question when I started going through the book is you have tons and tons of memorabilia. Now, I found later you got contributions from outsiders when you were doing the museum, but at the time in the early 60s, when you first became fans or whatever, did you just save all this memorabilia that you collected all that ended up in the book, or did you have to reacquire things, or a combination? What happened?
Well, most of the stuff that we were planned to put on display is stuff that I kept, because if you speak to Mike in a moment, he will tell you that I'm a bit of a hoarder, which is a bit of a problem for him and my kids. But finally, it's coming useful, so he can tell you more.
Well, Bernadette's been hoarding for 60 years, Mark, and we've always complained about it. But when we started this book, oh boy, were we glad she did.
I always think that myself. I write books myself on various topics, and I have a huge library, and it's like, oh, I wish I could get rid of this stuff, but I need it for what I do.
We really do. And it's so good that we kept this. We haven't got anything, basically everything you see in the book is ours, and we haven't borrowed anything. There's new stuff in the exhibition now, but the book goes from our childhood until we opened the exhibition in 1990. It doesn't really go past there. So it's got the first 30 years of, us going along in our lives.
Wow. Okay. And the first thing I thought of when I started reading through the book is, why the book now? Why didn't you do it like when you opened the museum or any time in between? I mean, what's prompting you to do it at this moment?
Well, the Beatles Story, as I say, started 30 years ago, and it developed as Liverpool developed. I mean, Liverpool is such a tourist attraction now because of the Beatles. The exhibition got bought out about 10, 15 years ago. We were all made an offer we couldn't refuse. So even though Bernie and I designed it, it was our idea. Everything you see there is what we put in it, and our design and our ideas. We did have other partners, and 10 years ago the whole company was bought out by our local transport authority called Mersey Travel. And so for the last 10, 15 years, we've been getting on with our lives and other things. I'm a professional musician. I've got a band, a rock and roll band. Bernie is a Beatle guide, as you know, you've read the book, and Bernie has been guiding. So we've been busy doing that and going on holidays. But 4 years ago, all those times, Mark, people have said, hey, why don't you and Bernie write a book about your experiences? And we've thought it wasn't that interesting. And so, but one day I woke up and I went, oh, I found a load of pictures of the creation of the Beatles Story, not our early days, just the creation and how we found the space at the Albert Dock, which looked like the Cavern, how we dealt with tourism and how we built it. And I thought, oh, I know, we could do a book. If someone wants a book, we can do an illustrated book of how we built the Beatles story. So that was it. It was just going to be an illustrated thing, lots of pictures and captions. And then a friend of ours, who is actually a journalist and a comic book writer, he worked for Marvel Comics. He was a friend of ours, and he came to our house. He interviewed us over 2 days, went away with 6 hours of tape, and the next 2 days later, he said, Mike and Bernie, this is bigger than how you built the exhibition. This, you've got to put your backstory in. So that's how it became a book, and it took 4 years to do.
Okay. Because, yeah, like I said, when I started reading it, I said, oh, yeah, I know about this exhibit. Unfortunately, I haven't gone to it ever, but it was like, it'll be about that, fun. And then, yeah, you wrote it very well. And there was more things that I thought would be in it. And I just got totally immersed in it. So, that's why I was like, oh, okay, this is really cool,
Yeah, well, you see, it wasn't that easy, Mark, believe me, because in the 1980s, Liverpool was a backwater. It had strike action with the dockers. The city council was militant, did not want to know tourism, didn't want to know the Beatles. We had a riot in 1981 in Liverpool. No one wanted to visit Liverpool. But of course, in 1980, when John Lennon was murdered, then started getting a trickle from America and Japan. And Bernie Bernie became a guide in 83, and she saw the kind of the enthusiasm of overseas visitors. Yeah, locals didn't want to know because they the Beatles have gone, they've abandoned us,
Right.
So
that's typical. I mean, you talk to any New Yorker, let's say, and it's like, I've never been to the Statue of Liberty. I've never been to this. Exactly. That's all right there, but
Yeah.
So
we did it on the background of this apathy in the 80s towards the Beatles. But as you say, what we wanted to do was, we didn't want to write another Beatles book. And we don't think it is, because it's got our backstory when we were growing up and went to the Cavern, and separately, we didn't know each other then. And then the 80s, it tells the story of how tourism developed and the struggle we had raising the money.
Which is amazing to me, because, as a total outsider from the thing and a Beatles fan since the late 70s, I was just saying it's a natural people would want to go to Liverpool and there'd be museums and statues and all the stuff that they have now. But, it's even amazing to me that even the Cavern closed ever, in 73. I was like, what? That should have been a holy shrine or something.
Well, they did try to fight it, didn't they? They tried to stop it, but
not only did it close down, they knocked it down.
Yeah.
The original they knocked down. The one that's there now is a reproduction.
Right.
Oh.
So, Mike, since you started in the book, I'm going to ask questions, because I just wrote questions as I was reading through. So I have a few questions based on things I read, and I was just kind of curious for you to kind of elaborate a little further. That, it's probably stuff that you didn't need to have in the book, but I'm just kind of curious. So you talk about how wild Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were in the book. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little more on that. I mean, you mentioned the thing about the Butlins holiday camp where it jumps off the diving board, comes up singing or something like that. But I mean, what were they like on stage? Because you never hear anything other than Ringo was the drummer, at least in my mind.
Well, let me tell you, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were bigger than the Beatles in 1960. Rory was he was known as Mr. Showmanship. Yeah, they wore great suits, they all looked smart, but Rory was tall, blonde, very athletic. He was in the athletics team, he could run, and sometimes he had to run because the Teddy boys down at Butlins would chase him because all their girlfriends fancied Rory, Sometimes his fast running came in, but as I say, he was the top band. If you will know, and Beatle fans will know, that when you see the Star Club poster of the Beatles and Rory Storm in Hamburg at the Kaiserkeller, Rory Storm's name is above the Beatles.
Right.
The Beatles. So at the time, Rory was big. The other bands who were big was the Big Three, the Blue Jeans, and the Remo Four, and other bands were all at the same level. The Jerry and the Pacemakers. There were so many bands. I mean, there were 350 bands in Liverpool. Incredible. Everyone was playing every night because there were coffee bars and concert halls, and anywhere that there was a room with a stage, there was a band on every 3-4 nights a week. So as I say, Rory to me, he was my hero before I saw the Beatles. And I went down to Butlins, as you mentioned. Butlins was a holiday camp which was open for seasons. So Rory had the summer season playing there every night. And it was just a great time to grow up and see your heroes on stage.
What type of stuff did they play? The same stuff Beatles did, or was there? I know they sang "Boys" because Ringo has said so in interviews.
Well, that was the big thing with Ringo. Rory didn't take all the glory. I think in the middle of Rory's set, he would say, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's Ringo star time." So Rory goes off the stage, and Ringo sings either "Boys" or "Honey Don't." He used to do "Honey Don't," Carl Perkins song.
That's cool.
And so it would be Ringo, and Ringo was always, a flamboyant drummer. He swung, he always flicked the drumsticks around. So he loved show business anyway, and I think that's what the Beatles saw in him, as opposed to Pete Best. Pete Best, very quiet, head down all the time. Ringo was swinging, he was laughing, and the Beatles thought his personality is going to fit in with the Beatles more than Pete Best.
So, Mike, then you go on and you talk about your musical experiences. I mean, you talk about bands you were in called the Thunderbirds, and then you were in one called Them Grimble, and then the Roadrunners, which was probably your biggest success, I would think, and then the Chords. I mean, did you, I don't know how to ask this. I mean, it's like, obviously everybody wants to be the Beatles, but did you think you would get any glimpse of the success or fame as the Beatles in all your various groups, or were you just having fun?
No, I wanted to be famous, Mark. I still do. No, this is enough. Having a book house, great. No. What was? I mean, I think we all, any ambitious lad in a group, particularly the lead singers, which I was. We loved showing off, I suppose. And I wanted to get better all the time. Mike and the Thunderbirds, that was my first group. Quite amateurish. Didn't want to go anywhere. I go somewhere. So I left them and joined Them Grimbles. Them Grimbles had a totally different attitude, and it wasn't just a beat group. It was a six-piece band with Hammond organ and saxophone. So we were doing a bit more rhythm and blues. We were doing Ray Charles. We were doing Mose Allison, Lambert Hendricks and Ross.
Oh yeah.
Slightly jazzy,
Yeah, that's cool.
And I love that. I really love that kind of music. But we had a real awakening when we got to Germany. In the winter of 1964, I think I was 21 just, and we set off in a converted ambulance, immediately broke down. The ambulance, the wheel fell off halfway down to the coast. Fixed, got to Germany, and we were working not in Hamburg, but a place called Kiel, which is even further north and colder. And we get there in the middle of the night. There's another Liverpool band playing there. They were leaving, we were playing. So we get on and we did a week. We played a week, 5 hours a night. I mean, this was a killer. I mean, your voice, being the singer, my voice disappeared after 3 days. I couldn't speak. So anyway, at the end of the week, myself and the organist, the leader, we went to see the boss for our money. So we knocked on his door and he sat behind his big desk, and he's a big German guy. He says, "What do you want?" Could we have some money, please? No, you're not getting any money. No money. You are a Scheiser Capelli.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if you want me to translate that, but you can bleep
You
it.
can, but yeah, I know what it means.
Yeah. So he says, you don't play this rubbish. You play Pretty Woman. You play Chuck Berry. Then I pay you. The next night I'm going, Pretty Woman. So anyway, we stayed and we were there for a month and we got paid. And so that was all right. So we did a couple of years as them Grimbles, went back to Germany a few times, and but we didn't get a recording contract. So I then moved on to the Roadrunners, who were an established Liverpool group. They'd done the Star Club. They were bigger, but they were breaking up anyway. So I joined as a singer, and we got a recording contract with Fontana Records.
Right.
Recorded a couple of sides, but they didn't get released, so I was never a released recording artist, but always wanted to get better. And I always had good groups and all that, and then that took me to the end of the 60s and meeting Bernadette.
Right.
And I was happy.
Now, one thing you said, I was going to say the next step is you met Bernadette, which I have written right here, but clarify this, is when did you discover that your flat was the same one where John and Cynthia lived for a time?
Well.
That's amazing to me.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
We didn't learn about that till Bernadette became a Beatle guide.
Oh, so you didn't know at the time. I thought you might have known at the time. I was like, wow.
No. And that came about. The flat was a friend of Brian Epstein's flat, and I actually got thrown out of home, you see, because I was going home late every night, getting in at 4 o'clock in the morning. And my dad basically said, "Michael, you either give up the group or you'll have to go." So I went. I mean, he was great about it. No, my dad was great. So supportive. But anyway, because we were doing, with the band every night, and we were going down to the Blue Angel Club. The Blue Angel was owned by Alan Williams, and we would be there till 4 o'clock in the morning, just with hands. So I bought this flat, and it turned out, well, you tell Mark how you came across it. It was when you were a guide, wasn't it?
Well, yes, I found out that researching, I knew the Beatles reasonably well, but I didn't know an awful lot about John and Cynthia. Although, there was a lot of gossip going around that they were going to have a child and all that business when Julian was born. But just before, I think he'd been thrown out of wherever he was living. He was living in Gambier Terrace with some of the other students from his art college. He must have met Cynthia, obviously, and as the romance blossomed, they had to get somewhere to live. And so they like us, rented, or like Mike, rented the flat from, I don't know who they rented it from.
I think it was through Brian, wasn't it?
Maybe through Brian. Yeah.
And
it was just a coincidence that we found out. It certainly didn't look like it does on the pictures in the book.
Right.
That was a surprise to Mike even when he came back from Germany.
Wow. So then the story takes a turn to Bernadette. So I'm going to ask you a few questions in a row. So Bernadette, you're basically a music fan all your life. Is that how you got interested in hanging out at the Cavern and hanging
Well,
out at the clubs
yeah,
and
I was
everything?
brought up in a very, when I say musical family, my parents were ballroom dancers, which was very popular at the time.
Mhm.
And well, we were, as kids, my sister and I were sent to the local dance school to learn how to dance. So I mean, even today, I still love, if I hear the rock and roll music, my feet are tapping and I can't help it to feel like dance, you know. But it's kind of something that's in your blood, I think. But my mum and dad were ballroom dancing champions at the time, and they were doing competitions. And I used to love the dresses my mum wore. You know, they were all lovely ostrich feathers and things like that. And it was so sort of suave and you know, very enjoyable in every way, really, dancing. But obviously, as a teenager, we sort of developed our own tastes and started to go to the cinema and go to the local dance halls. And it's when really after rock and roll, when was it Rock Around the Clock appeared on our cinemas in England, and Bill Haley was there. And my mum used to work in the cinema in those days, and she was at a cinema one day. When she came home, she was saying how awful it was. They were ripping up the seats of the cinemas. You know, you may have heard the kids went wild. Anyway, obviously from that, a lot of the boys were in groups, but they started to watch the American singers like Elvis and Little Richard and people like that. And so along with that, wherever we went to our youth clubs or whatever, we grew into that music and all enjoyed it. So we'd go to see the groups who were performing in England, obviously in Liverpool at the time. And that was what led us to seeing the Beatles for the first time. So it's just a story that's been written and rewritten 100 times, but you know, this is just our personal experience.
Right. Now, for you, saying personal experience, what was it like seeing the Beatles for the first time? I know you said they were still in their leathers and things like that, but what was it like? Just,
it was very exciting. It was, I don't know, did we write? I don't even remember what I wrote in the book now, but we were going to the youth clubs, the local youth clubs at the time, and we decided one night we would go to see this group who was a bit of an Elvis impersonator, in fact, wasn't he? His name was Farron and the Flamingos, and we thought we'll go to see them. But they were playing at a club which was in a part of Liverpool that I don't know what you'd call it in America, but we used to say it was a bit of a rougher, run-down area, and we'd been forbidden to go to any clubs in that area. So we went anyway. We told our parents we were going somewhere else, and secretly took a bus out to a place called Hamilton Hall. And that's the first time we saw the Beatles. When they came on stage, they were on last. There was the guy we'd gone to see was on, I think, in the middle. Jerry and the Pacemakers were on the bill. And the Beatles, who had just come back from Hamburg. We were sort of awestruck when we first saw them, thought how strange they looked because they leather jackets on, cowboy boots. All except Paul, he had like a reefer jacket on. But the thing we really noticed was John Lennon, we thought looked like Eddie Cochran. And Eddie Cochran was really our favorite sort of the American stars. You know, we thought he was fabulous. We loved his music. And so as soon as we saw the Beatles, we thought, wow, you know, we've got to go and see them again. So that's the first time we saw them. And I don't know if we put it in the book, but it ended up a bit of a disaster that night because the ladies' cloakroom, somebody had started a fight in there. The sink ripped off the wall. It also was part of the cloakroom, and there was water everywhere. And when we went to get our coats, used to hang them in this cloakroom. My friend's coat, her name was Joan, had been stolen. And we were both standing, about two 15-year-olds standing outside in the cold and wet, crying, wondering how on earth we were going to tell our parents what had happened. Anyway, Jerry and the Pacemakers was great, and they came out and they said, if you wait for us to put the gear away, we'll give you a lift home. So that's how the night ended. But once we'd seen the Beatles, we couldn't wait to get back and see them again.
Wow.
It was going to the Cavern.
Now, what was the Cavern like? I mean, obviously you can go to today's Cavern, but I mean, the original Cavern, I mean, could you, this is silly, but I've always thought about this. Could you breathe in there? And also, did it smell in there?
It certainly did. In fact, they used to spray disinfectant all around the cabin before people came to a show because it stank of cigarette smoke, beer.
No beer,
Not beer.
no beer.
No, it wasn't beer. It was the lads who drunk the beer elsewhere would go into the men's toilets, and well, I won't tell you what kind of a smell came from there, but it wasn't very nice.
And there was the smell of hot dogs.
Yes, and coffee.
Smoke, because you could smoke then in places, so you
Yeah.
had 5 mix these smells.
Yeah, and then the damp heat, because it was so hot, that the condensation would literally run down the walls, and your clothes would be sticking to you, really, you know, if you had a on or whatever. Sounds pretty grotesque, really, doesn't it?
I know. That's why I always think about it. I go, wow, it'd be great to see the Beatles back then. You just think of how, you know, the situation, like, especially like when Brian Epstein went down for the first time, since he's kind of a posh gentleman, you know, he comes down there, it's like, what the F is this?
He came down for the first time. I remember I was just leaving to go back to work in a pretty damp state, really. My hair stuck to my head and everything. But Brian stood in the doorway. It had sort of these steps going down into the cavern, which was down underground. And as he came down the steps, he just looked so out of place. He had a very camel hair coat, we used to call them. And he was with Joe, was it Joe Connery? Alistair Taylor was with him.
Yeah.
And we didn't know who they were, but then Bob Wooler, who was the DJ at the cavern, gave out an announcement. You know, we'd like you all to welcome the manager of NEMS, the owner of NEMS, Mr. Brian Epstein, you know. But we realised what he was there for. We just thought, well, it must have been somebody from the council coming to close it down. So it was a memorable day, I must say. But I know what he must have thought when he entered this smoke-filled, vile-smelling cellar. It must have been horrible.
I guess the appeal of the Beatles and others, you know, transcended it all, because I mean, you and Brian Epstein and others returned many times.
Exactly. Yeah. It was. Well, it is. Once we'd seen them, you know, they really did capture your admiration, boys and girls. You know, it wasn't just girls that loved them; it was the boys as well, and they just took the city by storm, really, didn't they?
Yeah, and you know, this cavern thing was in a very little street, Matthew Street, high warehouses each side, and it was the fruit exchange area. And so the smell of fruit as you walk down might have been fresh or even rotting fruit. Oranges, bananas, you could smell it. But as you got towards the cavern, basically you could feel the bass of the bass guitar coming through the cobbles, you know, because they played so loud. So it resonated through the cobbles. And then the next thing you saw was this kind of a fog coming out of the entrance. It was the condensation, the heat, and that smell. It really met you. But you know, you didn't care, because we were all, 16, 17 years old, and you knew once you were in that place, you were going to have a great time. And the other great thing, Mark, and particularly lunchtime sessions that I did a lot of, and Bernadette did a lot of, the lunchtime sessions always had the best of the 350 groups on. One day it would be Rory on, next day the Searchers, next day Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Remo 4, and of course the Beatles. So every week you would see the top 10 bands of Liverpool, and you got in for the equivalent of what a shilling, which is 5p now, and I don't know what that is in cents, but it's a small change.
Yeah. Wow. It's just amazing, you know, looking back on it, you know, it's like, you know, nowadays they probably shut the cavern down, you know, for health regulations or whatever. You know?
Council for you at the time.
Well, I think health and safety would have closed it down.
Yeah.
You know, when they had all-night sessions on, I mean, Bernadette went to all-night sessions, I played on a couple, and by 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, there was 900 kids in there. 900. Really, safety probably. And by that time, it was so wet, I think it used to blow the electrics.
Yeah.
So it would fuse on stage, and whoever was on stage had to ad lib.
Yeah, and chat to the audience.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was all good fun.
And Bernie, one more question. This is really important because this intrigued me. It's like, is this correct? You dated Paul once, and then you dated George many times and actually became his girlfriend for a while. What were they like back then? I mean, everybody always knows after they became famous what they're like, and they have, a persona, but I mean, were they much different back then, or what were they like?
They were great. They were just like any other normal boy you would go out with when you were 17 or 18, whatever they were. A couple of years older than me, but they were just like, I don't know really. It's very hard to say that they were not just very young teenagers as we were as friends, and I guess I was just lucky that I was enough to go out with them. I don't know why. It's I really don't know.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting because, I mean, for me, it's just interesting for every girl back then. There's probably jealousy, at least, saying, "Oh my God, you got to date George." It's like
I did. I got some very strange, unpleasant letters from the fans. It was a bit weird, really, a bit frightening at times, because they were starting to become more well known, and particularly when I was out with George. He used to get a bit upset. You'd go to the cinema and girls would recognize him. And as we were trying to leave sometimes, they'd be asking for autographs, and he'd just sort of usher me down and out and away, because he didn't like it. I know it seems strange to think he wouldn't like it. When you see them in America, you think they're all enjoying it, but the fan hysteria became rather frightening. And it was just very weird, really.
Well, I guess it just is the circumstance. I mean, if you're on stage, that's one thing, but if you're being in private at the cinema, like you're saying, you don't want to be hassled, So no, I get it.
You're right. But when I was hairdressing, we were on the second floor. We were above. The salon I worked at was above NEMS, not the NEMS that you read about in all the books. We were above the very first record store that NEMS opened, a road called Great Charlotte Street. And when George would pick me up from the salon if I was working late at night school or something, and the girls would hang out of the window, and I used to say to them, "Don't do it, don't be looking out the window." They did, and I knew it would get George very agitated if he saw them, but luckily I don't think he did.
You had the situation, Mark, when after Love Me Do had been released in Liverpool, and a lot of the girls didn't buy the record, thinking if we don't buy it, they won't get famous and they won't. But obviously they did. But as soon as Please Please Me came out and went to #1, that was it. And then was in a car. And George invited you to go to a show in Southport.
Yeah.
Tell them all.
It was they were performing at a place called the Floral Hall in Southport, and it had been agreed that if I could get a lift there, which I did from my sister, I would meet his mum, because it was close to where he lived as well. So his mum had come along to see the show, and I was to meet her, and then we were to be taken back to Liverpool by George in his car. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Bramwell. Tony Bramwell was a helper in those days. He was a good friend of George's, and he used to get all the gear in for him and get all the guitars ready and packed up. And the idea was he would take his car to the stage door. We'd be in the car, and then Tony would drive up and George could get in. On this particular night when it happened, a crowd had gathered around the stage door. Tony got the car, we got us into the car, drove up, and the girls literally descended on the car because they knew George was going to be coming into it. George ran out trying to get away from the girls, as it were, in the car, and the door slammed on his arm. As he was driving away, because Tony had left the engine running. He got out and got out the way quick. George jumped in, and as the door slammed, it caught his arm, and he had a rather badly bruised arm for quite a while. But when I say he swore, the language choice, not to be repeated to your listeners, but happy, I can tell you. But anyway, that was how Beatlemania really started to show itself, you know. And after that, I did get a few not very pleasant letters from other girl fans who sort of sent these letters to the shop where I worked, sort of saying, you know, who do you think you are going out with George and all this.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, that was it.
I assume you, because of just being around, you got to see John and Ringo and Pete even off stage and just casually, not just them singing on stage. Is that true?
They did, yeah, we did. I don't know if we put it in the book about the Beatles doll, did we?
You talk mainly on that period about Paul and George. You don't really talk about the others. That's why my question.
Well,
I mean, did you hang out with the rest, or were they too busy doing other things?
Well, at the Blue Angel we did later on at the Blue Angel, but and we used to go to a cafe in Seal Street called Joe's Cafe. All the groups used to gather there, and some of the girls who were friendly with them did as well. But the funniest thing I remember really about John was he was very sarcastic. Whatever he'd have fun with it nastily. Some people thought it was a bit offhand and a bit, you know, unpleasant. But you had to take him with a pinch of salt, as we say. He was being friendly. We made a little doll one time for, I think it was Paul's 21st, and the doll was knitted, and it was shaped like a beetle. So it had little antennae. It had a green and white striped shirt, which we made for my friend's school blouse, a little metal guitar around its neck. And anyway, we wanted to give this knitted beetle to Paul for his birthday. So we knocked on the door of the band room, and Paddy Delaney, you may have heard of him, he was the doorman then at the Cavern. He stand guard outside because the fans would always try to get in, and it was the only place the Beatles could go and hide, as it were, in between sets. So he knew us from going down regularly, and we said, it's Paul's birthday, we want to give him this. So my friend and I went in. With no sooner, we gave the doll proudly to Paul, who thought it was lovely and said, yes, this is great. But then suddenly John piped up from the corner. I didn't even see him properly. He was sort of sitting in the corner, and he went, you might have knitted us something decent like a guitar case. Anyway, it was just his sense of humor, and you know, it was just, fortunately, you know, we didn't take offense, and we went. So it was that kind of thing. He could be very sort of sarcastic sometimes if he like, I think, you know, it's just never knew which way to take John. You know, he was sort of friendly one minute and then sarcastic the next. So, but nature.
Yeah, and he used, in the early days before Ringo, of course, Stuart Sutcliffe was in the group. So, you know, John would spend a lot of time with Stu when they were socializing. You know, Paul would be out there with the girls. Ringo wasn't there then. John and Stu and their student mates, you know, would hang out together, and so that they'd be in separate little groups, if you like. But you'd always see them around the Cavern because it was small, you know, so you couldn't help bump into all the groups all the time. And this went on for 2 years until Please Please Me, and they went.
Right. And I know that's kind of like when the relationship with George drifted apart and everything else. And you two met, you got together and had a family, blah, blah, blah. Now, there's a little gap in the story, understandably. But after the Beatles broke up in the early 70s, in 1970, did you follow their solo careers, or were you like busy having family and past at that moment?
Well, we did, but 1980, as we said earlier, it's changed everything really.
Well, I think we kind of followed them a little bit. You know, as you say, 70 they break up, and it wasn't a very nice breakup. And so they all do their own thing, as we all know, you know, because Yoko was in John's life, and
Right.
you know, Linda was in Paul's life. Ringo goes off and makes films, you know, and George became the quiet Beatle again, but was his own thing, and of course he was the most successful with All Things Must Pass, or the concert for Bangladesh. But one funny situation with Bernadette, we'd been going out for a year or so, and we were in Liverpool walking one night, coming from the shop, Bernadette, and we were walking back to the car, and coming the other way was George Harrison and Mal Evans.
Yeah.
So this was 65.
Yeah.
They'd just come back from America. They'd done Shea Stadium, made a couple of films, you know, things like that.
Right.
So we bump into each other. I didn't know George that well, but of course, so he recognized Bernadette, and she'll tell you this of what she said to him.
Oh, I'm never going to live this down. I actually said to him, "Hi, how are you doing? What have you been doing lately?"
That's great.
I can't even remember. I just remember Mike sort of, I could see Mike's face next.
Been working. Yeah.
What have you doing?
Oh dear me. When I think about it now,
That's very funny.
Oh, dear.
all I was worried about was I said I had a silly hat on. I had these 1960s hats had sort of like a furry bonnet with like little bunny ears on the top, and that's what I was thinking about.
Oh dear, this famous Beatles seen me with this silly hat on. But no, it was really great. And as you say, we then had a couple of kids, and the 70s went on. I went into cabaret and theatre. Bernard was looking after the kids, you know.
Looking after the kids.
And but then 1980, everything changed, and 1983, Bernadette became a Beatle guide, and the Beatles came back into our lives.
Okay. One more question before that. Old days, though, just that 70s period. Did you ever go to the Cavern again prior to their original closing in 73, or no? After the Beatles left, you're done?
No, we didn't.
No.
Just curious. You know.
All our best friends had broken up. All our best friends in groups, they'd all broken up, and they were doing the same as us. You know, settling down, having families.
We stayed in touch with a few, didn't we? Yeah.
You know, the bigger groups, the more well-known ones, went into what we call cabaret in England. That was, you know, big theatre type clubs, you know, with serving meals. And so they turned into cabaret groups. So they weren't the rock and roll groups that we saw at the Cavern. They were very, very kind of smooth and a bit, I don't know, just cabaret, you know.
Interesting. Okay. So obviously you got re-involved with the Beatles, as you were saying. Now the first venture you did is called Beatles City. Is that the correct one? If I remember.
That's right.
Yeah. And it was about 1984 or something like that we're talking about, that it opened up, and it was kind of a flop. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a flop. Which it was nothing to do with us, the building of Beatles City. That was organised by a local radio station called Radio City. It was their idea. It opened in '84. It was actually, it was nicely designed. It was big.
Some great memorabilia.
The memorabilia was amazing. You know, they had $1 million worth of memorabilia, which they bought at 2 Sotheby's sales. And the memorabilia was amazing. But this is 1984, on a backdrop of Liverpool not being a very popular place to go to. It was in the wrong place, and it was the wrong time, you know. And it had stuff in it that, it had memorabilia, but it didn't have any soul. It didn't have any atmosphere, and didn't really have anything for a non-Beatle fan. And for a commercial venture, you've got to draw, you know, you've got to have 100,000 people a year coming through to pay the bills. And it wasn't like that. I became involved with it by mistake. In '84, Bernie became a Beatle guide. She was coming home every night going, oh, I've taken, Italians, Japanese, Americans out today. And she was, I was really interested in that. And my job at the time was working for a local newspaper on promotions. And so part of my job was going to the Garden Festival, which had opened. Cavern Walks opened with the new thing, and Beatles City opened. And so, but after 2 years, as you say, Beatles City was a flop. It was closed. It was up for sale. And by a quirk of fate, I ended up working in a place called Transworld Festival Gardens, which was a 6-month show with entertainments, fabulous gardens, but entertainments every day. So my job was events manager. So I had to organize events, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that was fine because I was used to doing that kind of thing. But at the end of the season, the where I worked was closing down and wasn't a success either. So there were 4 managers. There was me, the events, there was the garden, there was the finance, and there was the engineering guy. We were all gathered together in this office, and they said, sorry, we're closing next week. You're all out of a job. And oh no. Anyway, this guy went, oh, hang on, there is one job going. And I put my hand up and said, I'll have it. And I didn't even know what it was. And what it was, they had bought Beatles City. And the job was managing Beatles City. So next week, I'm sitting, this is 1986, I'm sitting in the managing director's seat in Beatles City, but it was failing, But you will have read in the book that we took it to Dallas.
Yeah, which is very strange, but I kind of vaguely remember it went to Dallas, but for me, Dallas or Liverpool, because I was in California at the time, it's like still quite a ways away.
Isn't it, in America?
I graduated high school in 84, so we're talking, I'm in early college at this point in 86, and I don't have a lot of money, so
well, Dallas was the strangest place to open a Beatles exhibition. Isn't it the Bible Belt?
Yeah,
part of it. Yeah,
they were burning Beatles records, but the reason it was because the guy who bought Beatles City and took it did a deal with South Fork Ranch. South Fork Ranch were a third partner in opening Beatles City in Dallas.
Amazing.
So but the great thing was the guy who bought it wanted me to go because no one else, knew about the Beatles and knew about the exhibition. But he also wanted Bernadette to go because she was a Beatle guy and because she'd gone out with George Harrison. And when we got to Dallas, Bernadette was like this celebrity because she'd gone out with George.
Crazy.
And we had 40,000 visitors in 3 months. So it convinced us, that,
the market's there.
the market's there. We've got to get back to Liverpool. We've got to open up in Liverpool. Beatles City didn't go back to Liverpool. It got broken up, splits, all over the world now. Anyway, so we got back to Liverpool without a job, by the way. I was job. And it was Christmas Eve.
Strange Christmas.
Anyway, I went straight to the tourist board and I said, Beatles City's not coming back, Mr. Tourist Board. What are we going to do about it? And at the time, again, the apathy to the Beatles even extended to the head of the tourism board at the time, who really wasn't interested in Beatles. Unbelievable the things we were up against. I persisted and I said, I went in every day and I said, come on, we've got a Beatle exhibition.
Well, and the big question is why? What propelled you to keep going when you're faced with apathy and negligence and disinterest or whatever?
I know. I guess
I think
it's
what we saw from the tourist board. We saw the visitors that were there, weren't they, looking for something?
I've always liked a challenge, Mark.
Fair enough.
That's why it married me.
This is true. Every day is a challenge. So honestly, I just persisted, and to get rid of me, this head of tourism gave me £1,500 and said, go and do a feasibility study on why Liverpool needs a Beatle exhibition. And I looked at him like, are you from this planet? You know, I took the money because I needed it. And so we did this feasibility study, and then we did a business plan. And then I came home one day and went, tell you what, let's do it ourselves. I don't want to work for anyone else anymore. And so we spent the next 2 years raising the money, and Bernie started designing it on the back of a piece of paper.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't have a clue, Mark, honestly.
Wow.
We never managed anything in our lives. I was a good man. Bernie knew the business, you know, she knew the Beatles. And we went into it blind.
Wow.
But our ideas were good.
Today,
And what made Beatles Story work was the fact that we'd had this experience with Beatles City. So we saw what didn't work. So instead of our exhibition being like Beatles City, showcases and memorabilia, ours was going to be an experience. You were going to be taken back into time. You were going to see it, hear it, and feel what it was like to be there.
Right. So, well, I mean, thanks to your persistence, we can all enjoy it. And if you haven't been there like myself, at least I can enjoy it through the book. That's what fascinated me, because I haven't been there, and I go, wow, you know, but there's more to the story that I'm curious about. And it's like, you said this, I guess this is part of your persistence and your personality and everything else. You met up with Derek Taylor and then later Neil Aspinall just to kind of see what their thoughts were about it and gauge the room, as it were. And but you said to both of them on both occasions, according to the book, I don't think you can stop me. And it's like, wow, are you inviting a lawsuit or what? You know, I thought that was pretty ballsy of you. So
You are right. That was my gut feeling all the time. You can't stop me. And I think we had gone so far in the preparation of this. We'd raised, you know, £500,000. We'd got the designs done. The designs looked good. People were going, this looks great. Yes, it will be a success if you do it the way you are telling us you're going to do it. So when I met Neil Aspinall, it was first, I wrote to them, they ignored me, I rang, and eventually Derek Taylor, Neil's right-hand man, I would say at the time, you know, agreed to see me and met me in the crypt of St. Martin's in the Field in London. You know, it was like a secretive meeting.
Yeah.
I said, how will I recognize you? He said, I'll have the Guardian under my arm.
Yeah.
It was like a spy thing, you know. So I go down with my plans and full of trepidation. And Rick was a charming man, absolutely charming. He listened to me. He looked at the plans. And I think what came over was our genuine love of Liverpool, our knowledge of the Beatles, and the fact that we were doing it for the people of Liverpool. We were doing it for the fans. We weren't doing it for money. We weren't suits. We weren't corporation, you know.
Right.
And I think in the end, that's what made him go back to Neil and say, this might be okay, Neil. Why don't you meet them? So that took another couple of months.
Yeah. And then you finally had your opening day, well, this very month, but was it 32 years ago in 1990? And then you said you had Jerry Marsden, of course, of Jerry and the Pacemakers, Bob Wooler, the DJ, Alan Williams, the Beatles' first manager, I guess, and Bill Harry, the writer. So I guess it had a pretty good turnout, but you said in the book that it was still struggling for a couple, 3 years even then. I mean, did you think of giving up even then after you're done, or did you just keep plugging away?
No, we
Well,
never gave up.
so-
We knew, because at that time, Bernie was working. She had written the story. She'd researched every bit of picture. She'd done all that. I'd done the other side. I'd raised the finance, and was meeting with the designers every day at Downer. And what? Oh, and of course, sorry, the Liverpool suddenly was waking up to the Beatles. The Cavern had reopened. There were tours every day. The Magical Mystery Tour was going around, and of course, and what was?
Let's get some
Oh, look at that. Cheers. And the Albert Dock, where we built this, which was the Albert Dock itself, is a group of Grade 1 listed warehouses built in 1846, redeveloped in 1984. And what it was doing, it was attracting supposedly 6 million visitors a year to the dock, and everything that was going on, because besides the Beatles Story, it had a maritime museum, and the Tate Gallery of the North opened in 1986. So by 1990, we were pretty confident that we would be successful. What we didn't know, that we had a recession. 1990, the year we opened, a recession started in England. The same year, or the year before, there was the Lockerbie air disaster. And what that did, killed all the American tourists. The Americans would not come to England. So we lost all the American tourists. Understandably, they were nervous, and the world was in a state. And I think there was the first Gulf War as well.
Yeah.
All this happened around 1990, and so we did struggle. We struggled for 2-3 years. We broke even after 3 years. I mean, this is a new business, and it's not a corner shop. It cost us £700,000. No new business makes money in the first 3 years. So we were convinced that it would be a success, and of course, after 4 years, we were getting the business. And then it just went on, and we were getting 150,000 visitors. And then, as I say, we sold out in 2008. Years ago, they got 300,000 visitors through.
That was one of my questions. I'm jumping one, but I'll ask it. Why did you sell at that time? Were you just well, I think you said you were offered money you couldn't refuse, is basically it. Okay.
Yeah, but what it was, I mean, even though we built it, we designed it, we did all the work to get it open, we weren't rich. And so we were minor shareholders in the whole thing. So we had a corporation that owned half of it, 50%, and then a couple of other local businessmen who put money in, and they weren't really interested in the Beatles. They just wanted money. They weren't in it like we were for the love of it. And then a company, Mersey Travel, who ran the Mersey ferries, they made us a big offer in 2008. I didn't want to sell. Bernie and we didn't want to sell because we were getting dividends every year. Yeah. And we'd started it. We didn't want to sell. But because you're minority shareholders, the other shareholders can take you to court and make you sell. So we didn't want to go to court. And so we did a deal. And we all sold out.
It probably was a wise decision in the end. I mean, it's like you can't run it forever, and why not be paid for all your labors? So
exactly. Yeah. And we're very happy with the people who are running it today. Yeah. There's a really good team in the Beatles Story, and of course, we are now, because we've written the book. They said, "Oh, great! You've got to launch the book here," and so everything's fine. The Beatles Story. I think now that the pandemic's over, the people are going to come back. When we were preparing for the launch 10 days ago, we were down there, talking. I turned around in the entrance and there was 100 people queuing to get in. I said, wow, that's all right.
Yeah. We have the cruise ships coming into Liverpool now.
Cool.
We are within walking distance from the ship. They don't have to get taxis or anything like that. They can have tours out of town if they wish to, but they can walk across to the Albert Dock quite easily.
Very good.
So it's in the right place.
And the other nice thing is, in the book, Bernadette's got some of her personal memorabilia, which is unique. It's never been seen before. So that's there in the book as well.
Yep. And from your hoarding.
So they say.
I have one more basic question about it. Well, so since you've sold it, in the book you have like a tour of all the different rooms and how it was constructed and everything like that. But has the exhibit changed much since you sold it, or is it pretty much the same as what you had when you were running it?
Yeah, certain things have changed because mainly because of the volume of people who are coming through. We everything was quite not claustrophobic, but was small at the entrance to get in, because we wanted to create very quickly people to go back in time. So first section was all about Liverpool in the 40s, the shipping. The second section was the influences on the Beatles, on film. And then you went into our first real set, which was Hamburg. And what's unfortunately what's happened, they've had to remove all the early part to actually get enough to get the people through.
Oh, wow.
They haven't. They've added memorabilia since we went, which is what we were going to do anyway. We wanted to get established, then we would increase memorabilia when we had the money to buy. So there's some very nice memorabilia in there now. Some lovely collections of John photographs. There's the piano from the record plant in New York City that John played on. Things like that. There's some nice stuff. George's first guitar. There's so much to do in there. You can really immerse yourself into the early Beatles Liverpool.
And it's also languages, because we had so many visitors from different parts of the world. They had to have a way, and we couldn't have it all on boards in every language, obviously. So they had to have a sound system where they could listen to the story and it be translated into their own language, which a lot of museums are doing now, But internationally, we had so many different countries coming that they had to, you just put your earphones on and press whichever language you wish to hear the story. But a lot of the boards are still there. And but you can go through in your own time now. And there's a cafe there and a shop, of course, with the and it's just, it's developed the way we'd hoped it would, I think.
I guess it's good, because if you're a repeat visitor, it's a good thing that it kind of changes over time. So it's not the exact same show every time you go through.
That's right. Yeah.
One story that was really amazing, and this ties into Charles Rosenay, of course, our friend, our mutual friend, that he loaned out Lennon's immigration paper for the tribute room called the White Room at the end of the exhibit. And the fascinating thing is he had the original on display for a number of years and then decided to switch it out. I mean, you could say the rest of the story, but
what happened, Mark? As you know, Charles Rosenay would come to the Beatles convention every year with a group of American visitors and do Abbey Road, and then come to Liverpool and have 3 mad days. And we became very friendly because I used to compare the Beatles conventions, and that's how I met Charles. And so Charles loved the exhibition. And he said, Mike, I've got this very, very special piece of memorabilia. It's John's fingerprints. Would you like to put it in the exhibition? And I said, yeah, that would be great. And what happened was I was terrified that they would get stolen. And after they'd been up a couple of weeks, I said to Bernadette, I'm not going to be responsible for these. So I got them professionally copied, and I swapped the original for this amazing forgery reproduction. And that was up there. And within a week, it was stolen.
Yeah, it was kind of enclosed, you see, the white room was enclosed.
And was I glad that I took the originals out. So the next time I saw Charles, I said, Charles, thank you, but you can have them back. and I think you probably know the Charles story with the fingerprints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing.
So we've been very lucky with meeting the right people, like Mark, like Charles, but also a guy in Dallas called Mark Nabashek, who, when we did Beatle City there, he and a couple of other Beatle freaks, they actually loaned us loads of memorabilia as well, and we've stayed friendly with Mark as well, you know, and his stuff's in his stories in the book.
Very good. Well, that's pretty much all I had for questions. It was a fascinating read, and you know, I do have to get out to the exhibit. I always tell this to Charles. I said, you know, I never have any money, but one of these days I'll break down and make the trip with him.
You should come on one of his trips.
You must come on one of Charles's.
No, that's what I want to do. So, you know, it was the pandemic that kind of delayed things, because during the pandemic that we became friends. I knew of him years ago from his Good Day Sunshine fanzine, and I knew he did these trips, but I was really, really dirt poor those years. So I just said, well, that's a fantasy for the future. Well, the future is now. So
sounds like a good title for a song, Matt.
Did you have any other final statements or thoughts about the show, or did you want to plug anything, or how do you pick up this book? I'll give the floor to both of you, and you can just kind of say how they can get in contact you if they have any questions, where to get the book and all that stuff.
Well, we're obviously very proud of the exhibition, and we're very pleased that we have got this book out. It's a hardback book. It's a lovely looking book. It's been printed and designed very nicely. You know, we're very pleased. And so it's, if you're in Liverpool, you buy it at the Beatles Story. But if you're out of Liverpool, if you're anywhere in the world, you go to your local main bookstore. You get it from any main bookstore, or of course Amazon.
Very good. Well, I want to thank you, Mike and Bernadette Byrne, for being my special guest today on the Fun Ideas podcast. And it was a pleasure talking to both of you. And I hope if you have time in your life to do yet another Beatle book, if there's any stories that didn't make it into the first one, you know, please do. You know, it was a very fun read.
Oh, we need a documentary now.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, Charles would probably love to do that. I'll narrate. That's Charles. You know?
Well, thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Best wishes to all your listeners.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.